This is one of those rare cases where an album both exceeded all of my expectations as well as really disappointed me. So, yeah, let's find out what I mean by diving into this record. 20 Pills Without Water by Bent Knee. So, Bent Knee is this is one of the things that I love about Bent Knee. It's so hard to kind of pin down exactly what they are. Now, the Prog Archives say that the band was formed in Boston's Berklee College of Music with Courtney Swain on vocals, Ben Levin on guitars, and Vince Welsh on production and sound design. Out of their combined love of epic and grand, and has an influence of psych, baroque pop, and avant-garde jazz. And yeah, that's a good way of summarizing them as a group. Now, honestly, since their 2011 self-titled release, they've gone through quite a bit of changes. You know, their sound has evolved and changed, and I find that Bent Knee is like the ultimate hit or miss band. You know, when they hit hard, and sometimes you're getting Shiny-Eyed Babies, Say So, You Know What They Mean, and Frosting, and other times you kind of get Land Animals and their self-titled release. And in fact, their last album, their 2021 album of Frosting, I love. And I know I'm in the vast minority. A lot of people don't like it. They're infusing a lot of like hyper pop, a lot of experimentation, more so than they've ever done before. They kind of took a little bit of a sidestep in terms of the jazz and funk that they've done on You Know What They Mean and Say So. But yeah, what they were doing was really interesting. I really dug it and I really loved it. And because I'm in the vast minority, so with this, we get a few personnel changes on this record. I think the biggest hit is Ben Levin on guitars. He was one of the founding members of the band, being one of the driving forces within the guitar. He also provided backing vocals, but also Jessica, I believe her last name is Cohn, on backing vocals and violins. And this was something that I really appreciated, was Courtney and Jessica's harmonizations. You know, their commanding of the vocal work. And I also really love Jessica's violin work, especially on like Leak Water from Say So or Catch Light from You Know What They Mean. And those two tracks really are like the shining jewels within their discography. Those are the two tracks that I keep coming back to time and time again, that showcases that this more accessible pop, like this kind of Baroque pop, can be brilliant and proggy with a brilliant build-up, a brilliant crescendo, and a brilliant payoff. So yeah, coming into 20 Pills Without Water, I was excited because I loved Frosting and I really wanted to see where they were going. But when I heard it, it felt like it was a bit of a step back and then forward. So they kind of took a pivot after Frosting, being like, okay, people didn't like that. We're going to shift back into the Say So and Shiny-Eyed Babies kind of sandbox, and we're going to play within that. And I'm like, oh, I really hope that I really wanted you guys to go back onto that, the Frosting track. And so that's kind of where the disappointment was. But I also get it. Frosting wasn't for everybody. And I get it. So what we have instead is something that I'm very, very pleased to say is probably their best sounding work within this sandbox. Even without Jessica and Ben, this still has that really, really like Bent Knee style. You know, Courtney really shows her own with being like, her vocal works throughout this record are intimate, they're personal, they're haunting. We've got like her typical, I don't want to say wailing, but like her typical passion is definitely found within all the nooks and crannies within this track. And it opens up very well with kind of a little bit of an interlude with Enter, but the album proper starts off with Forest. And it really did put my mind at ease with the initial, you know, oh man, they're going back to Say So, that pool. But it's engaging, you know, it's got that sharp edge that I really like with Bent Knee within their more experimental pop rock atmosphere. You know, it's got this teeth about it. It's got this strange undercurrent within a lot of the production side of things, in the synths and within the guitar works, that feels very off kilter and feels very off center. But having Courtney's vocal works being the through line in that, it kind of continues to lead you along without it being too aggressive, without it being too like jagged. You know, these are 20 pills without water. This isn't a jagged pill to swallow. And I love their experimentation, so Forest being the first track, being that initial boom of music, it really kind of lets you know right off the get-go whether or not this album is going to be for you or not. And I Like It continues that trend. It's a little bit more engaging. There's a little bit more energy behind this track. I really like the background off-kilter sounds that we have within the production side. There's just a lot of this weird percussion that's going on that is both engaging but also off-putting. There's like this kind of getting your back heckles up and being like, I don't know if this is really, if I like it or not. But they prove that they still have that funk, they still have that groove within Illiterate, and Illiterate's got this like really fun bop to it, and I really love the guitar works on here. They are channeling like a Ben Levin, like Ben Levin's presence is felt on this record, even though he's not actually featured on here. But that off-kiltered, very groovy, very funky guitar work is still kind of found, and I love how this bop is led within the chorus that elevates it back up into this very smooth, very accessible aspect of it. But it is interesting. Usually for me, the slower tracks, the smaller tracks are the ones that I'm less excited about, but that's the opposite here, because the two smaller tracks, the two tracks that take their time, that's a little bit more somber, a little bit more personal, Big Bagel Manifesto and Lawnmower, those two tracks are my favorite tracks by far. I love how Big Bagel Manifesto has this very soft, gradual build that's just a little bit of programming, a little bit of production side with Courtney's vocal works that then builds itself up into this really big and grand, and once again I'm using that word of off-putting, crescendo, where this like bass work has a lot more distortion in it, very similar to like a Muse track, without it being aggressive, without it being too energetic. And it really is just this gradual climb that provides a really satisfying play out. And I love that. I love that. And the same with the Lawnmower. Lawnmower kind of takes a page off of those more intimate and more personal side, where really it's just, I want to buy a house in the countryside. I want to, have a place to call my own. But even that, when I'm trying to shove off all the responsibilities of, the big life and the big city, I still have to mow the lawn, and that comes within its own responsibilities. So it's a little bit of the grass is always greener on the other side, but it's like, I will take on those responsibilities if it means a little bit more of a quieter life. And I love the build of that track. I love how grand this track feels. It's so big by also being so small and intimate, and that I feel is kind of where this band shines. It's not to the same vein as like Catch Light or Leak Water, which are two of my favorite tracks of theirs, but it has that same kind of DNA. It has a little bit of that same essence about it. So I skipped over a couple of tracks by talking about Lawnmower, but I wanted to cover Lawnmower. Cowboy and Never Coming Home. Cowboy is a very soft, somber, very almost like interluding track, with Never Coming Home being a little bit more of a dancey. This is the closest that we got with tracks like on Frosting, being a little bit more aggressive, being a little bit more off-kilter. It's got this dance groove. I love the programming and the soundscapes that are found on here. Yeah, I was just kind of hoping for a little bit more of that. Comet is another interlude that goes into Drowning, and Drowning, I believe, is the longest track at 6 minutes and 40 seconds. That kind of does what Lawnmower and Big Bagel Manifesto do without that big oomph at the end, and I feel I feel myself kind of drifting away from this track, which is a little bit of a shame. Like, I was wishing that it kind of engaged me a little bit more. And I do feel as if the second side of this album does kind of be a little bit more ethereal. It tends to be a little bit more atmospheric. And it's fine for the most part, but with Drowning, I was kind of hoping for just a little bit more. But then we come to a real highlight for me, DLWTSB, being like the first half, the typical atmospheric stuff that we've heard up to this point on the second half of the album. But when we get to the second half of this track, it brings itself up into this new wave, synth wave bop that I can't help but groove to. It's got this really infectious groove style within the rhythms of the synths that I really, really grab onto and I really love. I love the bop. I love the flavors that are found on here. And I wish that we had more of this throughout the second half of this record overall. And then we come to Exit, which is just a fine little treat at the end. Yeah, it's a good closing track. You know, it does a good job of closing off this album. So yeah, in the end, 20 Pills Without Water, as I mentioned, was a little bit of a disappointment because it didn't follow the same trajectory that Frosting did. But I was also very pleasantly surprised to see how good from start to finish this record was. If I had any criticisms about this album, I do think that it is a little lopsided. I think that, you know, the beginnings of this record are a little bit more engaging. They're a little bit more immediate. They've got a little bit more of a driving force. And the second half of this record, it's a little bit more somber, a little bit more dour, and I wish that there was a little bit more of a blending of these two rather than being two distinct sides. But that being said, I still kind of love the mythos of this. I love that as we go forward, this album gets more and more mellow to provide a very interesting start to finish listen. So yeah, I think in the end, I will say 20 Pills Without Water by Bent Knee is still one that I would absolutely download. Bent Knee still proves to be one of my favorite contemporary progressive rock bands. You know, I love how they're constantly trying to shift and constantly trying to kind of change their sounds while still remaining quintessentially Bent Knee, and I really appreciate that. I think that this album is one of the best albums to enter their discography, so if you've never listened to Bent Knee, this is a perfect entry point for them, and one that I think everybody will enjoy. And if you like this, I would recommend checking out Shiny Eyed Babies. I would also recommend checking out Say So. I think those are kind of like the two bigger records of their discography in this style. And if you want something a little bit more experimental, try We Know What You Are, because that one's one of my favorites. And Frosting is still my favorite, but that is definitely a proceed with caution, because just because I love it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody does. In fact, I know I'm in the vast minority. But that's what I've got for 20 Pills Without Water by Bent Knee. What did you guys think about this record? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And that's what I've got for you guys today. Yeah, I think that's what I've got. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.